You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Right before I turned on the mic, I had mentioned that I'm kind of hungry, and you gave me sagely advice that I want to share with our audience.
It's a thing I do. I try to state the obvious.
What was your sagely advice?
Get something to eat.
Thank you, prognosticator
There you
Newcomb.
go. It's always works.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well.
You went skiing. I'm super jealous because you and our good friend Paul have gone skiing. You guys so tell us, what'd you do?
We got seasons passes and we went skiing.
Season passes to where?
Galena, Illinois. Midwestern skiing, which is a more challenging thing
Yes.
than Western skiing.
And so I have had many people that
They say
are.
if you can ski in the Midwest, you can also ice skate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the same thing.
Pretty much.
And people tell me when I'm riding lifts in Colorado that if you can ski in the Midwest, you can ski anywhere.
Yeah.
So
I love that poster that I've seen, and I don't know if you've had it, but anyway, it's this farmer on skis going across plowed ground. It says Ski Missouri.
Oh, I don't have that, but I wish I had a copy of that because I'd put that in my office.
Yeah,
That'd be
absolutely.
Funny. So
It's a paradox.
Yes, it is a paradox. It's flat and plowed, and we don't get any snow. So,
But we do get, with man-made snow, we get ice.
we get a lot of ice. Yeah. So technically, Galena is not in Missouri. It's in Illinois. It's in very, very northern Illinois. So they actually
across the river from Dubuque.
Yeah. And so it does get cold there, and they do get snow.
Yeah.
It's just that your guys' experience this year has been that they didn't have a lot of snow. The first time you went, they must have made a tremendous amount of snow in the interim, and then the second time you guys went,
Second time we went, it was
you
great.
guys had a great time. So
Sun came out, slopes were groomed, and nobody was there.
that's nice. It's always nice when nobody's there, man, and you could just go from top to bottom and get on the lift and then go again.
Yeah.
Yeah, although
And that's the difference. You go from top to bottom, and you get on a lift and go back up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of going down several trails before you find a lift, which is in Colorado. But I mean, to have access to that from St. Louis, 4.5, 5 hours, and be able to get a good day of skiing in, that's a win.
Yeah, you can do it in one day if you want.
Yeah. So, for full disclosure, people may know this, people may not know this. I'm recovering. You are not, correct?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
You say recovering, you're talking about from
People-
addictive abusive substances.
People
Yeah.
who know, the people who need to know will know what that means. And if you don't know what that means, then you're about to get some education. So hopefully, but I was going to school and working in behavioral health before I got into recovery because I was going to school.
Okay.
And so we've talked about this before, that when you are working in a recovering atmosphere, so yes, recovering from alcohol and drugs, although making a distinction between alcohol and drugs is a misnomer because alcohol is just a drug. So we should never do that. People do. So we'll use that nomenclature because people are used to it, but alcohol is a drug. Just because it's legal doesn't change the fact that it's a mood-altering substance, and we can get into more detail in that in just a little bit. But when I got into started working in this field professionally, because I had a background in behavioral health and in the hospital, and I was recovering, people naturally kind of funneled me into that niche where I was working with people who had substance abuse issues, which is fine. I don't particularly see myself as a substance abuse counselor, although I do think I have great knowledge in that field, but it isn't my favorite kind of work. I would much prefer to do couples therapy. but I'm certainly happy to help people who are having addiction issues. But you had sent me an article that I thought was really great, and we've never talked about it. And then I was like, we should talk about it. I don't know why we haven't. I just never thought about it before.
So I was at a dinner party, and the conversation went in the direction of a man talking about having spent an evening on a business trip in a bar and talking to people working in a bar, just socializing, and discovered that 2 or 3 of the people that were working in the bar were in recovery, went to AA, but worked in a bar. And he thought, well, that's really funny. And I said to him, it's not uncommon. In my life experience, I've known any number of people who were, quote, in recovery, who worked in bars or hung out in bars because that's still where they tended to socialize.
Right.
And he said, why would that be? And I said, well, they're dry drunks. And he said, what's a dry drunk? And I said, it's somebody that stopped drinking but still has all of the issues that caused them to drink, patterns in their behavior that contributed to their addictive response, and still is problematic in their life. And so, they often replace one addiction with another one. So like if they use alcohol as their drug of choice and they stop drinking alcohol, then sometimes they become super, super religious. And they're reading and quoting the Bible and going to church every time the door's open. And that becomes a substitute. They satisfy their cravings and assuage their anxieties by going to church. Some people do it with smoking instead of drinking, or some other substance, some other activity. So it's still an addictive personality trait response. And so we were having the conversation, and the man at the party said, well, tell me more about that. And I didn't want to turn it into a lecture in psychology, so we chatted for a few minutes, and then it went away. But I went home and I thought about it and said, I would send you a note saying, maybe we should talk about this because it was something he didn't know.
And I want to be clear. If you work in a bar and you are recovering, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a dry drunk. Yeah. But it certainly is one indicator, because it means that you are in an environment that could be potentially dangerous.
Way in a journey.
Yeah. And one of the things that you will hear in recovering circles is you have to change your playmates and playpens, which means that you have to stop going to places that you associate with drinking and drugging, and stop hanging out with people that you associate with that if you want to stay clean for a long period of time. And that just doesn't seem to be very conducive with working in an environment where you're serving alcohol all the time.
You said that you're in recovery and I'm not. I haven't had a substance abuse addiction, but I have been described as a workaholic and have been addicted to work. But I've cured myself from that now. I'm retired and I don't work.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if cured is the right word, but you are certainly practicing a recovery
regimen
program associated with being a workaholic.
Exactly. But I think too that discussion identifies a difference in the way that you and I approach therapy. We've had this conversation in the 30 some odd years that we've been connected in this field. You are, by reflex, by nature, by preference, by training, by habit, more directive than I in the therapy that you do. And my experience has been that 12-step programs are significantly more directive than generic therapy.
Yeah.
They may be a complement or a component part of generic therapy, but because of your experience and your training, my observation of you is you tend to be more directive than I do. So you will say to a client, you have to go to 3 AA meetings this week. I would never say that to a client.
And we just recently did a show on how much self-disclosure on the part of the therapist is appropriate or correct. And the conclusion, spoiler alert, that hasn't aired yet. It will air soon.
It may not air before this one.
It may not air before this one. Hopefully it does.
Our editor and producer.
But people who work in the recovery field, in my experience, tend to be more disclosing and, as you have validly pointed out, and more directive than other therapists, because that is conducive with how you are trained to be in a recovering environment. So I remember in the early days of recovery, I worked in a hospital, Highland Center, which in the 1970s, named after Robert Highland, who was the chairman and CEO of KMOX here in St. Louis. And they built a treatment center in his name. And during the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of really influential politicians, business people, actors, professional sports players who came through that facility. And so I was brought up and trained to do that kind of therapy, which was highly confrontational. And even the way that we do therapy for substance abuse has radically evolved since the 1970s. In the 1970s, you were trained to be highly confrontational. You were trained to say things to people like, if this isn't your time to get it, then I hope you suffer a tremendous amount of pain and that it's excruciating so that you recognize that this is something that you need to address. We would never say that to people in therapy today.
I would have never said that to people in therapy.
But that was common in the 1970s and 80s, and it was really De Clemente and Porsche's stages of change theory that really started to evolve.
I agree. I understand that, but I also think it may be part of their addictive personality. There's some control issues involved there and some righteousness involved.
Well, yeah.
I've been there. I've walked the walk. I've talked the talk. I've had the BS. I am so oppositional to instruction and control, which may be an issue for me personally. But I don't respond well to that.
Yeah, and I think you may be right, because there were two ways back then that you could get a job in the field like that. You could be a recovering person.
Well, those places like Highland Center would staff themselves.
Yes.
Half with people that had the clinical education from a college and a licensure set by the state, and half with people that came to the field because they were addicts.
Right. And so if you're an addict, then the only claim to fame that you have is being an addict. And so you are naturally going to talk in vernacular that is commensurate with that.
So I was in a lot of group therapy sessions where somebody who was part of the program, meaning they were 12-step adherence. And there are 12-step programs for any addiction you can think of. Sexaholics, workaholics, alcoholics.
Emotions, eating.
But part of the challenge in the group is for somebody to say, when someone's just bloviating, and some other member of the group recognizes, they're doing their shtick, to call them and say, I know you're crap, and that's it. And, you need to pay attention to what you're doing here. So you call them out. Part of the responsibility for the therapist is how you handle, that call out, and facilitate a discussion around the observation that's therapeutic rather than accusative or power struggle. And that's a skill set that's hard to come by.
Right. And, we've said this 1,000 times, and other people have said it even more than that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem is going to be a nail.
Right.
And so if you only know recovery, then the only thing that you can speak to is recovery. And so I think that confrontational approach came out of that, because that was what those people knew. And so they could say, I'm elevated, I'm above you now because I'm recovering, and so I'm going to, speak to you in a demeaning way, because that's going to get your attention. We used to do these things called interventions, where you would gather all of the loved ones of a drug abuser
who refused to accept that it was a problem in their life.
Yeah.
Oh, I can handle it. I just drink beer. I'm not an alcoholic.
You would confront them, and these things would get visceral. I mean, they were ugly, and people would even say, "I'm no longer going to be a part of your life if you continue." And if you've had to go that way and choose to not be a part of somebody's life because they're, using drugs, I'm not telling you that that's wrong. I'm telling you these things got really ugly, and we don't really do interventions like that anymore. And the reason is because they never really proved to be very effective. No. You might get somebody to go to treatment, but not for the right reason. There's a question
of whether that whole approach of therapy proved to be effective, because so many of the people that went through therapy that way had to go through 3 or 4 or 6 iterations before it took.
Right.
And so, you're planning a 4-week stay at a treatment facility, it's very expensive. Your insurance may or may not cover it. And if it doesn't do the job and you continue to drink, and then you have to do it again and again and again and again. And all the blame and shame for that gets put on you. Well,
Right.
you're just not ready. You know?
Right.
You prefer drinking and causing all this harm to your family and your kids.
Right.
Because you can't say no to alcohol. So
Right.
you're a low-life SOB. And then you say, oh, whoa, and you get fired, you get arrested, you get whatever. And then they say, well, you need to go on treatment again. Maybe it'll take this time. And on average, it would take 5 or 6 times.
And that's not uncommon. I mean,
No.
it's not uncommon for people to have to go to treatment repeatedly, and that's because relapse is considered an artifact of the disorder. So most people, I'm not going to say all, because
Yeah.
that
But it's kind of a circular logic in service of the providers, isn't it? You need me. You can't afford to be without me. You can't get better without me, and you're not getting better because you're the fault. You're the problem. Not the quality of my work.
I don't know. I mean, I think that if we say and accept that relapse is a part of the disorder, that most people who go into recovery are going to experience at least one, if not multiple relapses through the course of their recovery experience, then I don't think that's then the treatment facilities aren't
So-
saying that. They're not making that a part of the
So-
disorder. It just is a part of the disorder.
When you do cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that you talk to people about is you learn to script for understanding and reacting to circumstances in your life early in life. And you internalize that, and it's become reflexive and automatic. You don't think about it, it just happens, you do it. It's a conditioned response. But if it's problematic, you can decide if you're unhappy, if you're in pain, if your life's not working for you, you can decide to change your script. And you can live a different life and not have these circumstances reoccur. But as long as you pay attention and are conscious and cognizant of what you're doing, the choices that you're making. If you go on autopilot, all of that reflexive scripting from childhood comes back, and you repeat the behaviors from your childhood, or the frame of reference or attitude or whatever it might be. So to me, that's the same thing that you're describing when an alcoholic falls off the wagon and goes back to being an alcoholic.
Right. I'm just saying I don't think that that's an artifact that the treatment centers artificially created. I think it's an artifact of the disorder.
Yeah.
The treatment centers may, they may pump it up. They may, they may use it to their advantage, but it wasn't a creation of theirs.
Okay.
All right, let's run to our break, and when we come back, we're going to pick this up.
One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
That's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. And so, but before the break, we were talking about this idea that did the treatment centers create this idea of relapse being a part of the disorder or not? And I was saying I don't think that that's true. They didn't. They may use it to their advantage, but it does bring up, to me, a point that I think we want to talk about today, which is this concept of dry drunk. So dry drunk is a concept of the original 12-step program, that if you go and you just don't drink,
Right.
but you are what they would call white knuckling it, so you're grabbing the arms of the chair and
So where do
holding
you
on.
come down on that thing? If I'm an alcoholic and I go to treatment, does that mean, and I'm in AA, does that mean I can never have a drink again? Or can I drink socially if I'm responsible and better? I've heard that argument from people in the program on both sides.
And so that is, yes, I think that is the crux of the argument, which is, can you ever drink again? And that brings up what in the 1960s started to evolve as the concept of harm reduction. So harm reduction was originally a program that was incorporated into the methadone treatments in the 60s when there was a big heroin epidemic. We created this drug called methadone. Well, we didn't. Scientists created it. You and I didn't. And the advantage of methadone was that it had a 24-hour half-life rather than a 12-hour, which meant that you could give somebody the drug once a day and they would not have cravings. And so they paired that with harm reduction, and harm reduction said anything that you do that is less destructive than what you were doing is better. So if I give you methadone,
Incremental benefit.
well, I mean, yeah, incrementally, right. But if I give you methadone, and then that means that you don't have to look for heroin twice a day, and you don't have to,
Break into somebody's house
exactly,
and rob it, and
to
societal
get money,
benefits.
then that's better. And so then, but you may still drink and you may still smoke marijuana, but you're not doing heroin, and so that's better. And so this was really anathema to the established hardcore 12-step treatment paradigm, which said that if you are addicted to any drug, you're addicted to all drugs, and therefore you can't do any of them. So there was a real
Because the issue
back
in
and
the
forth.
substance is the behavior.
The issue with substance abuse is if you think about the biological
Changes.
parts of the disorder, that it is the result of a delivery of dopamine through specifically the nucleus accumbens, but the reward pathways in the brain, and that any drug that creates that response, then you would have the likelihood of becoming addicted to. And all mood altering substances do that. So,
But by that explanation, like an SSRI would be a problem.
no, because it's not a delivery of dopamine through the nucleus accumbens. It's a delivery of serotonin in other neural receptors.
But it's a blocking agent. When it goes across the synaptic cleft, it blocks some of those other chemicals from getting through, or it facilitates some getting through by blocking others. I mean, so but
Well, it blocks serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitors specifically block the reabsorption of serotonin into a presynaptic membrane. That's what they do. So that's a different mechanism of action than the delivery of dopamine through the reward pathways.
Okay.
And so actually, while technically you are correct, if a mood-altering substance,
That's important to me. I'm addicted to being technically correct.
if you are talking about a mood-altering substance, which by definition means that it changes the biochemistry of your brain to create a difference in mood, then that would be considered a mood-altering substance. But most people tend to very specifically rely on the definition that a mood-altering substance is anything that creates dopamine in the reward pathways of the brain.
As Albert Ellis often said, I'm very masturbatory that way.
Yeah. So,
So let's talk about symptoms of being a dry drunk.
Okay.
If you've stopped drinking, you started a program or not, gone through treatment or not, but you've stopped drinking, and somebody says, oh, I think you're a dry drunk. How would they make that determination? What are they seeing? What are you doing? How are you feeling that throws you into that category?
well, I would say that that I agree with what you were saying before, which is that people who are dry drunks are abstinent. So abstinent means you're not doing a thing. You may be abstinent from the drug of choice, from the alcohol, but you are not sober. You're not doing the things that create a difference in your personality that could be measured over the long term. And so this disease is not just one of using a substance. That's really more of a symptom of the disease. The disease itself are all the other personality traits.
But some of it is behavioral too. I mean,
Well, sure.
How do I want to approach this? If you train yourself to have a cigarette with a cup of coffee, and you decide I have to stop smoking because it's an addiction and it's a substance and I'm altering and so then you have a cup of coffee and you start looking for a cigarette. Your hands are making the motions to look for or find a cigarette and hold one.
Right.
Sometimes you'll hold something like a pencil to try to satisfy that biological training.
Right.
Or if you have sex and then want a cigarette after sex. I mean, it's a similar, I've heard it described that way, trying to stop that process of smoking in that circumstance is exactly what we're talking about, going through withdrawal and having relapse issues.
In recovery speak, that would be what's called a ritualized behavior. So a ritualized behavior is anything that you do so often in conjunction with using your drug of choice that you can't separate the two.
Okay.
So if you go to a bowling alley and all you do is drink there, but you also bowl, then the first time you go to a bowling alley, you're going to feel like something's
hanging out
missing.
in the bar as a waiter or a bartender could be a mistake.
It could be a mistake. Now, the reason why I think hanging out in a bar may be a mistake for somebody not using alcohol is because different drugs have different sensory triggers. So for people who use heroin, if you go talk to people who use heroin, they will tell you that if somebody's got really pronounced veins, that's a trigger for them. So that's visual stimulation. That when they see a vein, that is triggering for them.
Yeah.
Okay? If you talk to people who are...
Like being a peeping Tom, checking out your veins.
Yeah. But if you are talk to people who have, and this isn't universal, but it tends to be fairly consistent, who use cocaine, they will tell you that just talking about cocaine, and that's why a lot of people who were getting into recovery from cocaine didn't like going to meetings and talking about it because that's a trigger for them. For people who drink alcohol,
Does Eric Clapton know that?
I don't know. But I think that was after he wrote the song.
Oh, okay.
But for people who drink alcohol, alcohol is triggered through the olfactory sense. So the smell of alcohol, that's why I would tell clients all the time, people tell you, go home and pour out all your alcohol. I say, don't do that. Yeah. Go home and throw it in the trash. I mean, if you're willing to dig through your trash for a bottle of alcohol, you're willing to go to 7-Eleven for a bottle of alcohol. So you don't need to pour it out.
And you're more severely addicted than we're admitting right now.
But
so you may need to be...
Yeah. But pouring it out could be a trigger.
Right.
So don't set yourself up for that. So if you're in a bar and you're smelling alcohol all night, I think that's probably a pretty risky thing. Now, does that mean that no one ever recovered and continued to work?
Or a low-grade secondary payoff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes, absolutely. Yeah. But then are you really, really then even abstinent if you're standing around smelling it all night?
It's like methadone.
Exactly.
Just getting the smell.
Right. So it could be harm reduction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It absolutely
let's run through some of these symptoms. Wanting to be the center of attention. Feeling like you're always the victim. Why is this always happening to me? Everybody always takes it out on me. Having trouble communicating with other people. Mood swings that range from depression to extreme happiness. Fear that you can't change. Anger and resentment towards family and friends who intervened in your drinking. Believing that sobriety is boring. That's a big one. So, but there are a lot of these, and as in psychology generally, when you get a list of symptoms and behaviors that fall in clusters, they're applicable to all kinds of problems. So you can look at this list and go, oh my God, that's me, but I don't drink. I've never had a drink. I don't have a drinking problem, but I have these problems.
Right. And so what I believe, what I've promoted, and what I hope eventually is going to be adopted by the scientific community and the psychological community is that substance abuse is really an attachment disorder. At its core, people who are insecurely attached are going to be more susceptible for substance abuse. That substance abuse is a way of medicating that attachment disorder. And so good therapy for individuals who are recovering or want to be recovering is anything that you think is good, solid, affective, AFFECT, treatment for attachment disorders. So people who are not participating in trying to mend that broken attachment are really going to struggle with recovery for the rest of their lives, because whenever
Which goes back to my argument about cognitive behavior.
Right.
So this article goes on to talk about if you are concerned about this in your life and you want to explore it, one of the treatment questions becomes beyond just stopping the intake of the substance.
Right.
What do I do to reframe my thinking, to clarify my understanding, so on. So it says cognitive behavior therapy is number one option. Dialectical behavior therapy is an option, a significant option. Motivational enhancement, which can help increase your motivation to make positive change. Your wife won't divorce you, your kids won't, throw you out.
Right.
Mutual support groups, 12-step programs, going to AA meetings. Again, coming back to the beginning of this conversation, you're very directive and will say to somebody that's struggling with this, you need to do this in order to get better. If you don't do this, it's a sign to me that you're not ready yet to get better. And I want you to hear me say that so that it's also an acknowledgement to you, you're not ready yet. You're just nibbling. You're not as hungry as you think you are for change. You know, because you may be doing this for somebody else's pressure. Your boss says, "I'm going to fire you." Your wife says, "I'm going to divorce you." You know, and so you're willing to consider it, but with only sticking your toe in the water.
Exactly.
You haven't embraced it,
Exactly.
and then that's defective.
And probably over time isn't going to be very effective, because when you get confronted by situations in your life that trigger that attachment disorder, you're going to need to find some way to medicate that. You may not go back to drinking alcohol. You may adopt some other compensatory behavior.
Exactly, and which can be a replacement addiction.
Yes.
Or it can be a temporary attachment to a person, a program, a behavior, something that you do instead of or in lieu of.
Right.
Like the 12-step programs generally say assign you a sponsor to work with. And so when I have an overwhelming urge to drink and I'm really angry and upset, and the way I normally deal with being angry and upset is I drink,
Right.
I call my sponsor and say, I really want to go get a drink.
Right.
And my sponsor says, no, or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know what they say.
Yeah.
But hopefully they talk me off the ledge and I don't drink. And sponsors, generally because they've been there themselves, they're further along the curve of the 12-step program. To the degree that there's also something called 13 stepping, which happens in 12-step programs. And 13 stepping doesn't exist in the lexicon of a 12-step program.
Right.
It
means that you establish a relationship within the context of the 12-step community that you're attending.
Well, my understanding is it means you're hustling somebody that you're supposed to be supporting. Hopefully to have sex with them.
You're establishing a relationship, an inappropriate, a relationship that isn't probably healthy.
Right.
Yeah. And so what I would argue is that the reason that 12-step programs work is because of the connections that help
and they will tell you, many of them will
treat.
tell you, you have to, your friends and you have to change your environment, you have to change your game. And people that are not in the program are not going to be good for you.
Right.
Because they don't know what you know. They don't know what you're dealing with. You need to be in this like group. And so the program becomes an addiction.
Yes.
And the people in the program become a substance abuse.
And let's say very clearly, I am saying very clearly, that is a misrepresentation of good recovery and what is required for recovery. Recovery does not require you to only hang around recovering people. That is, anybody who tells you that doesn't know what they're talking about. That's not good psychology.
But it's a transitional attachment that can be identified and discussed and moderated so that it doesn't become a replacement abuse.
Because the disorder at its core is an attachment disorder.
Yeah,
and so
that's what you said.
solidly treating the attachment disorder is the real cure. And so to the extent that, yes,
but generally in therapy you don't start there. You don't say, okay, you have an attachment disorder.
Right.
You say this substance abuse is interfering with your functionality.
Right. Because you got to triage
that. Yeah, you got to triage. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great conversation. Thank you for facilitating it, because I didn't have the opportunity socially to continue that conversation with that level of depth, and I wanted to come back and talk about it.
And obviously, this is we just talked about a trickle, and this is a torrent. And so this is something that we will revisit because it's on my radar now. But yes, this was a great initial conversation. But anybody who has questions about this for themselves or for someone else can get us through the website psychwithmike.com. If you want to engage with the show more, you can always get us there. If you want to find us on the interwebs, go to the YouTubes and find us at Psych with Mike. and subscribe to the show there. That is super helpful for us. Go on to Apple Podcasts and leave us a comment and a rating. That helps other people find the show, which we really appreciate. The music that is in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.